Pick up the pieces and go home. Do you know how? Pick up the pieces and go home. Back on ancient queen, follow those who fell in your shadow. Say rulers make bad lovers. Better put your kingdom up for sale. Up for sale. Or did she make you cry? Make you break down? Shatter your illusions of love. Is it over now? Do you know how? Just pick up the pieces and go home. Did she make you cry? Make you break down? Shatter your illusions of love. And now tell me, is it over now? Do you know how? Just pick up the pieces and go home. Go home. Head out on the highway, looking for
1, 2, 3.
exploded space. I love smoking lightning. Heavy metal thunder, racing with the wind. And the feeling that I'm, yeah, I gotta go. Head out on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Yeah, I'm gonna make it happen. Take the world in a loving rain. Fire all of your guns and constant. Explode the space. And let the truth nature shine. We were born to be wild. We can climb so high. I never wanna die. Born to be wild. Born to be wild. On the first part of the journey, I was looking for the light. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There were sands and hills and rain. The first thing I met was a fly with a buzz and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. After 2 days in the desert sun, my skin began to turn red. After 3 days in the desert fun, I was looking at a riverbed. And the story it told of a river that flowed made me sad to think it was dead. You see, I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. After 9 days, I let the horse run free, 'cause the desert had turned to sea. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There were sands and hills and rain. The ocean is a desert with its life underground.
Well, good afternoon. How is everyone? Good, nice. I usually ask people to fill out a Google form as people are coming in and out, because I like to see, just who people are. Who here is a classroom teacher? Just out of curiosity. Oh, wow, a lot. Anyone here an administrator? Couple, okay. And does anyone work to support teachers, whether it's instruction or technology? Nice, nice. Thank you. Well, I'm Caroline Habig. I'm an instructional technology coordinator in Lincolnshire, Illinois. Prior to taking this job about 2.5 years ago, I taught high school social studies in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The school I'm at now we're a very large high school. We're about a 4,000 student high school. Very fortunate to be able to have a lot of access to technology, as well as a lot of different types of programs for many of our students in terms of all needs they have, interests they have. It's pretty amazing. But things just don't always happen or turn out well just because you have them. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about how did we get to where we are with our iPad program, where did we start, where are we now, how do we service professional learning to continually build capacity of teachers at a high level so they're not just having the technology accessible, but how do we make the most of it for students? I'll also give some student examples of work or the types of work we try to achieve, and I'm just going to get started. So really, like I said, it takes a lot of planning. We don't just jump into a program and say, hey, we're going one-to-one. Actually, when the iPod Touch came out, our district started exploring some of the value with iPods. And then as the iPad evolved in 2010, they started exploring iPad ones. They'd have iPads on carts. Teachers would check them out. They'd explore, what kind of lesson can I do? And then when the iPad 2 came out, because they had started to see some positive impact or use of it for learning, they invested more in iPad 2s. And then by 2012, 2013, we developed what were called smart courses. These are courses where teachers would apply to have one-to-one iPad access for their students who were in their courses. Specifically, it was Spanish 2, AP Music Theory, and Anatomy and Physiology. So those were what were known as our smart courses, and they were really supposed to give some insight into, how valuable is this device and how can we further work to help other teachers if it is valuable as we move forward in exploring technologies as we aim to go to a one-to-one environment. I want to share a video from some of our students at this point in time who are in the smart courses, and just to let you know that we're trying to be very mindful about teacher perspectives as well as student perspectives as we're designing experiences.
Something different aside from just studying or just reviewing and just like solid memorization. It's putting what you know to the test and applying it in a way that's fun for the students.
Such a more personal learning experience, I think, because everything's kind of like custom to you in a way, because it's your technology.
Like, we had this thing in the story kit where we did the interviews with like a partner, and our teacher told us to go back and like look at it like a couple weeks ago, and we were listening to it, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, I didn't like speak anything, and now I could, and just how they sounded, like, it was just pretty cool.
It really does help you remember words, because it's like a more personal thing. Like, you're putting in your photos and you're looking and you're talking to other people about the word, and I think that really helps a lot, and that was also really fun to do.
So some of the big takeaways we had, and you can hear our students talking about, is they felt that having access to the device that extended beyond just a certain class period or time period allowed them to really personalize what their style of learning looked like with the resources they had available. We also truly believe that learning is social in nature. I mean, if you're at a conference and you're interacting with other educators, chances are you've would agree with that and experience that as well. I know a lot of times when it comes to large technology initiatives, sometimes people are concerned that technology is a distraction or that it isolates people. But for us, we really found that we've been able to implement our program in ways where we can actually really take those social, collaborative aspects of learning to a completely new level. And then in 2013-14, we had slightly over half of our student population, all freshmen, sophomore, and anyone in a freshman, sophomore course, went one-to-one iPad. And then this year, this is the big year, we're 100% iPad all in. So just to give you some perspective on where we are as a school. We do feel that there's been, throughout this whole growth process, that there's been some achievements. And specifically, we really believe that our technology initiative isn't a technology initiative. It's really under student engagement. We find that we're able to engage learners in new ways. We're able to differentiate learning opportunities and provide more choice. I'll talk about that. And we've also really been able to broaden our definition of formative assessment, and I'll get into that. So some specifics I'm going to go through is, one, why did we choose iPad? So what makes the iPad special when there's so many technologies out there? How are we supporting professionals, right? That's huge. And yes, that's me when I used to have long hair. And then what does deeper learning look like with the iPad? And how do we assess our outcomes and continue to chart for growth? So why the iPad? The biggest thing that we find after lots of looking around is that learners create in new ways. They don't just consume content, but they produce it. And as I go through some examples, I'll be very concrete about what I mean for that, because I know these are big phrases people throw around all the time. Oh, this device creates, this device consumes, this one does this and that. And I really want to be specific and mindful about what is valuable about creation and what can that really look like. And I'll show you that a little later on in my presentation as I start to talk about the features of the tools, right? We also found, from a breakage standpoint, because I know some people are interested in looking at different devices, we found that we've had very good luck in terms of the devices themselves not breaking, being able to easily update how they're managed that way. We do have a smart desk where students are able, it's serviced by adults at this point in time, but students are able to come if they forget an iPad or if they need help downloading something, or if for some reason they need an extra charger, they're able to be serviced all there. So that's something that we have found so far to be pretty helpful. And then one other thing that's kind of interesting is that we found that having going with one device has actually helped us to have more success. And and not just our kids, but especially for our teachers when it comes to helping them thrive. And just to give you some insights, when I took this position, we were on our way to one-to-one iPad. We were rolling out Google Apps for the first time. And then recently after they adopted a new learning management system. And you know how much fun all that changes, right? So for us, there's a lot going on, and it's about how do we find ways to make things manageable, and really helping our students as well as our teachers personalize their learning and have personalized innovative experiences. So I also want to show you a video clip. I know a lot of times people say, oh, kids know everything about technology. And I don't necessarily think that's always true, especially when it comes to knowing how to leverage different tools for academic or professional purposes, things like that. And I think we have a responsibility as leaders and educators to really help provide experiences that build that skill set.
See, when I was in 8th grade and growing up, I always hated technology. It just never worked for me, and I was always like, I just would rather do this on paper. But I've kind of changed now because the iPad, it's very efficient and it's really easy to work with. Having technology and the use of iPads and computers and all that in school has definitely helped my ability to problem solve and be independent and be a leader in my classes. Some benefits of working in a group are that you have the ability to be a leader and you can really work well with others and you can I mean, that's a skill that you're going to need in life. When you get a job, you're going to need to know how to like communicate with other people. And it definitely helps to do it in school. And definitely with email, I used to never check my email, and now I check it every day. And Google Drive definitely helps. And just, haiku. I love haiku.
That's our
It's my
learning
favorite
management
thing
system.
to do. Like my favorite, like on the iPad. Communicate with my math teacher, for example, when I'm confused, or when I get something, I can share it with all my classmates and be like, I get this. Like, if any of you need help, I can help you. And all like the worksheets and the notes are on there, and it just makes it more efficient. It saves paper, and it's beneficial.
So some of the things that I think are interesting that our kids are saying, and I see this more and more as they talk to more kids and interview kids about the experiences they're having, is that they feel that having the types of learning experiences that we're providing them that are technology rich and collaborative are helping them to really, they keep saying, I notice in these interviews that they feel like they can be a leader, they can share. And what's also really interesting is, like, as educators, how we have the opportunity to create those mindful experiences where we don't just post stuff online and just push it out, but how do we create those interactive spaces or maximize tools in ways, or allow our students to maximize tools in ways where they can really advocate for themselves, like she talks about talking to teachers, as well as showing our peers or problem solving. And I think that's pretty interesting. Another thing I'm going to talk about today is how we're really redefining what professional learning looks like, and how our educators are growing. One thing that I think has been very common is that technology has, I think easily been seen as a way to manage, execute formative assessment. So in our school, we specifically talk about the desired state of learning, the current state of learning, and then how do we want the kids to get from the current state to the desired state. Our director of assessment talks about how the teacher often models and should represent the desired state of learning. I would say traditionally, technology has been seen as a way to capture the current state. Most easily, or most commonly, I think, that often ends up being using quick apps that give us a quick snapshot of where kids are at. And that's good, but sometimes it only shows us little deficits, like this group got this right, or this group did this well, or these X number right and wrong, which is good information, but I don't believe it's the full picture. And if we're especially concerned about getting from the current state to the desired state and focus on that growth piece, we really believe that we have to take a deeper look at student thinking. And for us, the iPad has been a really, really interesting way to help students articulate the gaps in their own thinking. Because if you can figure out where you are and where you need to be, and then problem solve with your teacher or yourself about, like, and your peers about, what do you need to do to increase that growth, that's huge. And especially, we have a lot of courses that are starting to go towards standards-based grading, or we call it evidence-based reporting. And our technology, and specifically iPad technology, has been huge for supporting the way teachers give feedback, the way students are demonstrating mastery and progress over time. And that's something that's new in terms of how we are thinking about formative assessment and broadening our mindset, and really focusing on this idea of growth over time. And to really make that happen, we focus on the iPad in terms of how it is a creation device. And more importantly, and more specifically, how does it make thinking visible and audible? When I go through the student examples a little later on, I'm going to talk about how it's the features of the device and the features of the apps that allow our students to create in ways that really show making their thinking visible and audible. And then also talk about what opportunities do we have as educators for supporting students in and outside of class because of this type of work that they're doing. So I want to start by talking about moving people. What does professional learning look like? How do we approach it? Specifically looking at moving beyond substitution, and how do we truly transform learning experiences for our kids? And I would say that also starts with how we are developing professional learning opportunities for our teachers. So I want to start with this clip.
So these are all real apps, and I downloaded these from iTunes. This first one is
I apologize
called,
if you've already seen it.
Is it dark outside? It's an app. It uses GPS, and it's based on your location. It can tell you if it's dark outside? Let's find out. No, it is not. No. Before this, I had to call someone and ask them if it was dark. So this is really handy for me. All right.
If you haven't seen that clip, she also talks about like the stapler app where you hold it up to paper and it makes a sound, but obviously it doesn't staple anything. But it's free, just like the office supplies at work, she says. So the reason I like to show that video is because a lot of times in my role, people come up to me and they say, Caroline, how do I make this technology fit? What do I need to do something, cross it off the list and move on with our lives? And I would actually argue asking how do you make it fit isn't necessarily the right question. And instead, when it comes to helping teachers think through the role of technology, there's two processes that I think are really important. I went to Learning Forward this past fall, and the whole day session I went to was from Steve Barkley. He does a lot with instructional coaching, and I really think a lot of the work he does or how he articulates the research lends itself very well to people working with helping teachers think about technology. You know, I think we have instructional coaching, but people who are doing those roles specific to technology, I think really can take a lot from those approaches. So for example, I think first and foremost, the big picture goal is student achievement, and we need to start with that. So this is kind of like backwards design for helping our teachers. So you need to start with student achievement, and then you have to identify where the student behaviors needed to get to that student achievement, right? And then when you're looking at the student behaviors, how do we get those? Well, we have to look at specific teacher behaviors. What teacher behaviors and actions are powerful for getting the student behaviors to get to the student achievement? And then professional learning. Professional learning should allow us to get to the strong teacher behaviors that get to the student learning behaviors that get to the student achievement. And this is really how I think we need to start thinking about things, or continue to think about things if you're already doing it. And the focus really needs to be about that end result. And for me, in the work I do, it's really about building a mindset. If you've been in my other sessions, I also share a video that I made using VideoScribe, which is an iPad app, where, you know, there's certain things that I believe people in my role, or even as individuals ourselves as educators thinking about the role of technology and learning, we need to go through. So I think there's these mental steps, these questions we need to ask ourselves or our colleagues that we're working with to help us really prepare these lessons. So the first one I always ask people is, what's going well? Right? What are you already doing? Chances are you are doing something in your career that has gone very well and you've seen success. So, and then why is that? And then I narrow it a little more. I say, what works for your learners now? Because our learners change year to year, or even within the year. And that's another really big question, is what works for our learners, and pushing our teachers to really look at what are the unique needs our kids have. And then, of course, my favorite question is, what would you like to see or do that isn't necessarily happening now? And this is where this problem solving, the collaboration in my role as an instructional technology coordinator comes in to help that. And we narrow down even further, what learning behaviors do students need to gain, right? And then, of course, I always think it's important to start simple. And you'll see this in some of the examples that I go through a little later, is that really start with one strategy or learning behavior you want to focus on, and then work backwards from that, and use the technology as a way to problem solve to get there. So the video I usually show, and I'd be happy to share it out later, is outlining these steps, because at least in my school, I cannot remind myself and people enough that this is how we need to think before we even have a conversation about technology. And then the other piece is really looking at what do we want our learners to be able to do, and how can technology facilitate that. And I have a little video clip I made with VideoScribe to help my teachers remember those big things, because I think sometimes it gets easy to get stuck in just using technology in one way. Learning is much more than memorizing content. Technology affords us more opportunity than ever before. Students can not only consume information through using technologies, but more importantly, can create authentic artifacts and products that demonstrate their thinking and growth over time. Students can use technologies to curate their learning artifacts, and teachers can use these curation tools to help design and build on student activities. And of course, technology allows students to connect, collaborate, and reflect beyond their individual work, more so than ever before. Technology brings all these pieces together. So the big thing there is realizing that, and like I said, this is probably nothing new, especially now that you're in your second day of METC. But it's really about putting these pieces together. And for us, the SAMR model has been a great way to also help teachers modify their thinking. Who here uses the SAMR model in their work? Okay. Who here has heard of it but hasn't quite used it? Okay, more. Who's not sure what it is, and that's perfectly fair too. Good. Okay, so I think we actually have a good amount of everyone in each of those categories. When I talk about the SAMR model, and I know sometimes it's like, oh, why is this person talking about a model? Or it's like the experience some people have is when you have a question, you go in and your administrators or superiors say, oh, read this book, here are all the answers, stuff like that. But so what I like to do is actually break down the SAMR model through the lens of one app. I know a lot of times people say, oh, this app is a high level app. Oh, this app is a lower level app. But I would actually argue we need to keep the conversation focused on what are kids doing and what are they, how are they supported or allowed to push that further based on the tools that they have. So I like to use subtext as a good example. Does anyone here use subtext? Anyone heard of it? Maybe a couple? Okay. So just to give a quick background, and you'll learn more as I go through the examples here, and I'll talk about why it's important to do this, perhaps with your teachers you work with, is that at a minimum level, subtext allows you to distribute a text to either a whole class or groups of kids or individuals. It has, depending on the feature or if you go premium route or not, there's different assessment tools and features where you can see where kids are, some built in, some teachers can create in terms of assessment, things like that. So that's all I'm going to give you for right now, Ryan. So if we're talking at the substitution level of SAMR, you're just replacing a new technology or an old technology with a new technology. So here it would be me saying, okay, I want you to read this text. I'm going to give it to you and read it on paper. And well, now I'm substituting the iPad for the paper, and now you're reading it electronically. There's no task change, there's no functional change. So that's just substituting, right? New for old. At the augmentation level, this is where you have some technical features that enhance that experience, but and augment that experience, but it doesn't really change the task. So once again, I can have you annotating on paper, but at the augmentation level, there's some helpful tools the technology provides, but the task is still the same. And that's the key thing. What are the students doing? What are they able to do? Some of the nice features here are that obviously there's a dictionary feature, there's a pronunciation feature for learners who need to hear things. Obviously the traditional annotation tools, but you can also comment. You can search things on Google and connect. So that's the augmentation level. And this is where the task is still the same, but there's little features that make life a little easier, just like spell check, grammar check, stuff like that. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. This is when we have to say, does that technology allow my kids to do things differently? So at the modification level, I want to talk a little bit about an example in terms of the features that I want to say here. When I first started exploring subtext, it was about a year ago. And I was talking to one of my colleagues at one of our feeder schools, and I said, hey, Jimmy, have you used subtext at all? He's like, no. I said, but are you interested in kind of playing with it with me and trying to see what it can do for us? And he's like, yeah, why not? And he's like, yeah, and there's a 5th grade teacher who would be happy to work with us, or let's work with our kids, our class, stuff like that. I'm like, perfect. And even better, she's like, I'm going to be out this day. You guys can run the class, which we appreciate, because then we really could like see what was going on. So in their social studies lesson, the kids at this time, they were saying the Civil War. And having at one point in my life taught 9th grade U.S. history, primary source documents, even at that age and beyond in high school, I think are a little intense for those of you who have ever had that experience. So one of the big things we wanted to work on with our kids in general was building their ability to have deeper comprehension, work on their close reading skills, how they're able to synthesize and work with informational text. Those are all things I think all of us at different levels are working on, right? I think those literacy skills, those thinking behaviors. So we were thinking, okay, 1, we found the need, we identified the need. 2, we want to look at strategies that'll be effective. So we picked read aloud, think aloud type strategies, okay? So the need, the strategies, and now we were like, how can we capture this in a new way by using technology? And for us, first of all, so in class, I model the read aloud, and then we asked the kids, what did Ms. Habig do that was helpful? Because we talked about how a lot of times the things that good readers do, it's all in their head, and we wanted to make our kids more aware of those metacognitive activities and give them the tools to enhance their skills. So what we had them do is we put them in groups. We assigned the same primary source text to each of the groups, and we told them to use the commenting features. And what it says here is you can choose to make your comments private, public to the group, or just shared with the teacher. And we asked them to put those thoughts that they had that they normally would be doing aloud using on the document. And before we could even tell them, and these 5th graders, before we could even tell them to look at each other's and give feedback or carry on those conversations and text connections, they were already doing it. And before I show you a little video clip of them reflecting on the experience they had, I want you to know that this 5th grade class just has access to iPads on carts during the school day. And the reason I'm kind of putting that out there is because when you listen to the reflection and the ideas they have, you would think that they had these iPads like 24/7 and had access all the time. So it's really interesting to see some of the things they're taking away from this in-class experience.
If you didn't know what something meant, someone could explain it for you. So, when you understand the book, it's a lot more fun to read it.
So, like she said, instead of just putting a post-it note inside, you can actually show with the group, because it's technology, and you could just interact with people. They can comment, and they can tell you your thoughts. Yes, you read books, and you show what you think. That's how I think how subtext works.
It's helpful mostly so when you're at home, you can still communicate. Like a long-distance book club, but it's still helpful in class, but I think it would be more useful at home.
Yeah, it's a long-distance thing, but it depends. It's like you can use it anytime. Like if you're in class, sometimes you can talk to them about okay, I typed this down, and let's say you can just talk to you. But yes, if let's say you need help on a book or you're home, you can just type and say, hey, you guys, what this is, and then they can tell you.
Like reading each other's minds, they say. And this idea of peer help and support, and really helpful to learn as a group by seeing what each other thought. So it was really interesting to see how providing this opportunity for our students, and I actually really also liked, or I found it interesting that the student talked about how it was different than just using stick-it notes for her notes in a text and stuff like that, and just the accessibility part of it. And then at the redefinition level, this is where you can completely alter what students are able to do because of the technology. And one example here would be, I have a friend who taught 4th grade, and he had his kids doing research and then creating books and then publishing them to the iTunes bookstore, and then forming collaborations with other classrooms around the world and having these conversations about their research, and really getting to a point where you're looking at making connections in completely new ways in terms of how they're dialoguing about their work. So when it comes to helping teachers really refine their practice and keep that student-centered focus, we believe that there's a couple key ways to go about doing that. And really, how do we move from a bunch of apps and a lot of confusion to finding efficiency? And before I get into all that, I want to show you a video. I'm going to tell you it's a little older, but it's a good reminder in terms of how we need to be practical. Okay, and I think a lot of times in talking change, especially when it comes to large-scale technology rollouts, it can be overwhelming on a lot of levels for people.
Emma. 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 Emma.
Nouveau le trèfle maxifal, vraiment.
So yes, at some points we have to be practical. We have to realize the world in which we live, how our classrooms operate. Yes, sometimes the internet goes down, which we've never experienced. And then, it's like we just have to be realistic. Another thing that we found to be helpful was selecting some core apps. I know a lot of times teachers want to say, can I have a science app? Can I have a social studies app? Can I have an English language arts app? And while there may be some content specific things, we really want to push our teachers to have a better understanding about how really it's about the creation. It's about apps that allow students to find their voice and have choice in terms of showing what they know. So for us, these are just some of the core apps that all of our students have and that we're able to leverage in different ways. In terms of professional development, we're also leveraging a lot of parts of the Apple ecosystem to help make many things happen. And I'm going to talk about how in designing professional learning, we're looking at iBooks Author, iBooks, iPads, iTunes U, how we're bringing all those supports together to really change what professional learning looks like for our teachers. And I'm going to start off by telling you a story before I describe like what those courses look like. What does that professional development content look like? And I have to tell this story first, otherwise the latter part won't make sense. Last summer, I was at the Apple Distinguished Educator Institute in San Diego, and on another front in my life, I'm a cyclist, and I had convinced some of my AD friends to bring bikes, and we'd get up at like 4 in the morning and go ride before they kept us all busy. Not you, not Louise. And next year maybe. And so that often leads to having to do laundry. So, okay. At least for me. So I convinced another AD who was there from Switzerland to go do laundry with me. And so he borrowed a bike from an Australian. So that was interesting because they're different heights. And as we were sitting at the laundromat, we were talking about the kind of work we were doing. And I was saying how I was going to be working with a group of teachers as a part of a student engagement cadre this year. And I had to design all the professional learning. And I was saying how, these are some of the things I see my teachers struggling with. This is my goal. I want to put things in iTunes U, have it very hands-on. And he said, oh my gosh, we are doing a very, very similar thing. So my fellow ADE, Mark Shillito in Switzerland, and I decided to combine forces. And that's when he calls us M. Laundrette on Twitter. And that's why I have to tell the first story, or this makes absolutely no sense. And we joke that our iTunes U course with all our professional development gets worked on 24 hours a day because of our time difference. And so he has his teachers doing very similar things. And the big goals of our iTunes U course has to do with increasing student engagement, empowering educators, developing the professional capacity of teachers to be mobile learners, because we know it's very hard, sometimes even for ourselves, to truly explore mobile versus portable environments. And then how do we create something that's sustainable? And this, I'm just going to show you just a little bit of this trailer, but one thing I like to do, and I'm going to talk over this, is that when we're working with our teachers, constantly running around using the apps and like taking snapshots of them learning. So this is like one of our student engagement cadre meetings, where it's so important, we feel, to show our teachers artifacts of their own learning, not just having them create, but getting that process. So like even making something as simple as an iMovie trailer and then being able to send it out to my administrators and my faculty and saying, hey, this is the kind of work we're doing. Here's a quick snapshot of how we're spending our time, what our goals are, has been really, really interesting as well, like actually putting those practices into action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that iTunes U course looks like. At this point in time, it's actually a private course because we have the discussions feature on. So if I tell you about it and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting, I'd like to either use it or lurk around, come up to me later and I'd be happy to add you. The focus here, like I said, is to develop our teachers as leaders in specifically looking at mobile learning. And our iTunes U course is built in a way where our teachers, they're not just learning about a learning strategy that can help kids, probably one that you're probably already familiar with and want kids to grow with, but then teaching them about how the technology can support that, and then having a component where the teachers themselves are engaging in learning that way and producing artifacts. So they're getting that hands-on experience as well. We're asking them to reflect on it. So it's not just, hey, here's an idea, or hey, here's an idea, look what you can do, or look what this tool does, but putting it all together and helping our teachers to adopt those learning practices. And that's something new. Another resource that I would suggest to people, if you haven't explored it at all or heard of it, and we have many of these in our course, are the One Best Thing projects from Apple Distinguished Educators. And the really cool thing about these is that they're multi-touch books that provide you with the lessons, the examples, the tools of everything you would need to make that happen, and they're free. So if you're looking for models for yourself or for working with other teachers, this is another great resource. And something that I would love to share is that, and I know Luis can comment on this as well, he's my fellow ADE up here, is that ADEs just love the work we do, and we're always excited to get involved with others. So if you do end up finding some stuff you like, don't be afraid to reach out. Like just tweet someone. Chances are they'll actually get back to you. I know for us, I was using one of the examples. I tweeted out to Larry in New York, and he's like, hey, let me know if I can help or anything. And he then talked to my teachers, and it was really neat. So what I want to tell you is, yes, these resources are out there, but don't be afraid to kind of search these people out and make your circle bigger. And then another thing that I just want to mention, we haven't, and I'll be honest, we haven't gotten to the point where all of our teachers in our cadre are doing this yet, but implementing this idea of coaching. Eventually, how do we help build individual capacity in ways that can help build the capacity of others? So also in the course, we have things like coaching logs that I've adapted from Diane Sweeney in terms of how it relates to technology-rich lessons, also helping teachers to use those on the iPad. And then I also briefly want to, before I get to some quick student examples, I want to talk about mechanisms for sharing. I mentioned before this idea of iBooks Author. We're also working, I work with teachers from different divisions in my school, that's departments, we call them divisions though, to really create dynamic learning experiences. and then evaluate them and provide the resources, the student examples, all coming into creating a multi-touch book that we can share with the rest of our faculty and anyone else. It's in the iTunes bookstore. But what's kind of cool about it is that every chapter has an introduction, usually produced by the educator I worked with. We give the learning experience at a glance. We provide you with all the resources. If you want a traditional lesson plan, you can tap the PDF, email to yourself. All the apps are linked there. Learner reflections, learner artifacts, teacher reflections, things like that. So if you're curious about different types of lessons and learning experiences, this is one of the resources that I'm constantly working on. And before I get to the student examples, some real quick things here. We'd like to focus again on visible thinking strategies. I also like to remind my teachers of instructional moves. These are things good teachers do, but we don't write down in lesson plans, like gauging prior experience in student readiness, giving clear directions. You'd be amazed at how following your own directions will help you realize if they're clear or not. And then talking about what might happen, so helping teachers to be more comfortable. And then one of the most important pieces, which has to do with providing students with feedback. I think a lot of times, especially when you're designing new lessons and you're putting in newer technologies, things can be a little exhausting. And even if you get to that point, we need to make sure we follow through to the feedback and assessment piece, because that is really where we are going to be able to help our kids to grow. So I want to start with a current event, and I apologize a little bit if you came to the Ignite session I gave. It's a little bit of the same story, but recently I started working with one of our social studies teachers. Her name is Miss Stone. She's U.S. History. She's a team leader for U.S. History, and she's interested in improving a couple things: literacy skills, collaboration skills for kids, and getting them to delve more so into deeper thinking. And most importantly of all, she has a good sense of humor. And yes, this is from Halloween. This isn't what she looks like every day. And when she's like, "Caroline, why'd you use that picture?" I said, "Hey, you put it on that slide share, so free game." No, she said it was good. And when she and I first started working here, she walked past my office and she said, "I'd like to find a way to use the iPad." And I was thinking, if we could explore moving our textbook from paper to putting the textbook on the iPad, we will be using the iPad. My team can cross it off the list and then we're done. And I said, okay, we can talk about that, and that's cool. Let's see what that publisher has to offer, and let's see what features it actually might have that would help your kids in different ways. But what I'm more excited about learning is, what are you working on now? And like I said earlier, this is a big question that when you're working with teachers, you should always figure out where are they at now. And she said, well, my students are studying the progressive era movement, the Gilded Age, early 1920s. And I said, well, how did they show mastery? And she said, well, we have every unit, we take an FRQ where they have to write down examples. They have to answer these specific questions. So for this unit, it was the problems of industrialization. What reform did they use? Was that reform social, political, or economic? And how to enhance democracy? And then, I asked her, well, what are your learners' needs? So we covered the content. So this is what you need to do content-wise. But where are you seeing kids struggle? And she said, in many ways, she said they're struggling because they have different needs. They have all sorts of learners in here. Some are very unmotivated. Some are overmotivated. Some need different supports. And they really lack a deeper comprehension of the material. She said, I don't get it. I tell it to them all the time, but they're just not getting it. And I said, okay, here's an idea. Let's keep the learning target the same, but let's look at what that process is as we want to move the kids along. So we're keeping the targets the same, but we want to change that process. And for us, we wanted to explore the iPad, specifically using the app Book Creator. And I'll talk a little bit about this, but the nice thing about Book Creator is that kids can design dynamic multi-touch books, but they can also use a lot of the other content that they produce in other apps. So how did we go about it? Well, we kept the same learning targets, and we actually made it a little more accessible, we found, by breaking it down, by telling kids each page of your book is going to cover these specific topics. And yes, you could provide other opportunities for choice, but for her population, what she wanted and needed, this was most effective. So they're answering the same questions. We're also expanding opportunities for choice. They get to pick the reform, as well as we provide choice by engaging them in app layering. Okay, and I'll talk about that, what that means in a second here. So basically, remember, the core of what they need to know and demonstrate is the same. It's just we're modifying how are they doing it. And because Ms. Stone isn't very familiar with this technology herself, I said, hey, why don't we look at it? Why don't we pick one of the reforms and then do an example? So we decided to create our own book, going through the features. We also shared the features with the kids and talked about the possibilities that it would give them. In Book Career, you can also record, which is nice. We talked about how when you produce content in one app, you can bring it in to really make your book your own and show creative aspects. So when they had to talk about what life was like before the reform, I wanted to give them an example of how they could go beyond just typing out text of what life was like. I showed the kids how to search for images, but also think about the images they're searching for, and do they make sense? Where are you getting them from? Are you citing them? Things like that. How Pick Stitch, using apps to put them together. That's just a nice free app. And then taking my content and creating a piece of historical fiction, this whole idea of letter home. So giving kids this idea that, and this is not a new thing. I mean, you can write historical fiction. I mean, that's been going on for a while, but really showing kids how they have the choice to show this learning in new ways. Also showing them how apps such as Educreations, as well as Explain Everything, could be another way that they explain if that reform was social, political, or economic. Once again, showing them they have choice. And then another very crucial piece that I would advise anyone out there doing this project or anything similar is creating checkpoints where we provide formative feedback. We gave the kids a Google form, and for every part of the project they had to do, they had to talk about what did they know content-wise, so we could say, ooh, there's a red flag, we need to help redirect this person and make sure their information's right and their understanding is correct. And then we also challenge them on how will you show that? So really pushing them to think about how they're using the technology in a way to be meaningful. I also work with my teachers when it comes to the assessment piece. I think, and once again, this is going to sound like common sense, but when we're getting busy, I know it can be hard to do, but really creating rubrics in ways where we set kids up for success. And another thing that was really nice is that when the kids turned in their iBook files, is we could view them on our laptops as well as on our iPads. And having that flexibility for us as teachers evaluating student work was helpful as well. And these are just some of the learner reflections. The kids said, they said that they loved how it gave them ways and options to demonstrate their knowledge. They said that they were using tools that they had never used before. They gained deeper content understanding, as anywhere for liking this idea of enhanced choice for creativity and chance for creativity. So that's just one example of how I work with my teachers when we're doing that job embedded coaching model to really help them gain this understanding. Because my goal is to have them be able to think through these learning experiences and these technologies even when I'm not there. And that's why I say it's so important to think about that mindset. We are running a little low on time, but I do want to show maybe one or two more examples. So the app I'm talking about now is going to be Explain Everything. And I want to show you this app. And when I show you the examples, I want you to think about the features that it has. So specifically, when I'm working with our PE teachers, the director of PE wants to change things in terms of kids not just working on specific basketball drills or rules of football or soccer, but more importantly, thinking about lifelong health, cardiovascular fitness. And just so you know, our freshman PE is a class of 40 freshman boys next to an art class of 40 freshman boys next to an art class of 40 freshman girls. So it's loud and crazy. And the technology has been a way for our kids to show their learning in this content area that they haven't done in this way before. So when you see this video, also look at the features that this app allows the students to use.
Hi, I'm Mike Komarovsky, and this is my basketball drill presentation. When dribbling, one should remember to keep their eyes up, knees bent, and ball low and close. I need to keep my eyes up and bend my knees more, as shown in this diagram. When passing, one should remember to take only one step after catching the ball, pass straight across on the chest pass, and bounce the ball in the middle on a bounce pass. I should remember to bounce the ball more towards the middle.
And cut Michael off there. But I want you to know that for us, really having these tools that you can take video and embed it, either video you've taken before or directly into Explain Everything, and you can take that volume down or you can put that volume up and you can talk over it, you can annotate, you can draw, and you can capture that is really, really powerful. And then if you think about it, when it comes to science, we have our kids working in ways with this app where they're actually documenting their experiments and they're coming back and talking about how to support a claim for their research. That's another example I usually like to show, because it's looking at what the kids used to do, what are they doing now, and how is that impacting their learning, helping them to achieve the next generation science standards, which are definitely more inquiry-based, more process-driven, and how our kids working with argumentation. And so that's another example of how the technology has helped. And then I'll show you a little bit. Do you want to see the first grade example? Yes? Okay. Sorry, I know. And then I'll let everyone move on with their day. But I think this one's good because it also shows not only what first graders are capable of, but how we as teachers can use student work to help parents to support their kids learning outside of school. Because I think parents always want to help their kids, but they don't always know how. So this is Ani in first grade.
I'm Ani, and I did an investigation of balance and motion, and this one can't balance because those two aren't below. The two counterweights aren't where the balance point should be, and it's not stable when you balance it. And for the next one, it's balanced because these two counterweights are even and they're below where the balance point should be. And when you balance it, it's stable. And for this one, it can balance because these two are really even and they're below the balance point. And if you balance it, it can be stable. And for the last one, these two can't balance because they're not even. And this little part is below, but it still can't balance because the balance point is way here. And when you balance it, it's not stable. And that's what I learned.
And not only is she cute, but it's pretty impressive to use the terminology, to go from doing the paper manipulatives to then explaining using the iPad. I mean, what a great tool, not only to show student work, show student growth over time, but also to help support parents in their work for helping kids. So thank you for your time today. If you want to connect or brainstorm, we're always up for it. Just get a hold of me and have a great day.